Many thanks indeed, Hamad, for running everyone through the technical guidelines for this meeting. So it is 9:31 here in Bratislava, so let me welcome all of you today who joined our event on the road transport sector-specific training session. My name is Bartek Bednarovic, and I'm a labor mobility officer here at ELA, where I work in the enforcement and analysis unit. And together with my colleague Ivona Kasprzyksova from the Cooperation Support Unit, we have the pleasure to welcome you in the follow-up, a second round of our training sessions on road transport. Some of you might have already been with us, was it about last month, where we had a workshop on road passenger transport that was coordinated by Ivona, and today's event will tackle some of the outstanding issues, novelties related from the mobility package. I must say in the beginning that the event is organized together with the European Commission. So we have a number of our colleagues from Director General for Mobility here with us in the room who will be delivering the training. So if I could just please have the next slide. Hamad extensively explained to you the technical guidelines for this meeting, but just a quick recap for those of you who have just joined us. You will see that as a regular attendee, as this is a webinar, you will not have the functions to unmute yourself or turn on your video. If you have any comments or questions, you may use the chat function or simply raise your hand during the discussion, and we'll be able to unmute you so that you can pose your question. A very important thing is that you have interpretation provided into all EU official languages, with the exception of Irish, so you can choose the interpretation channel that you prefer. Remember that it is a webinar and we are expecting quite a large number of participants. So if you're going to be intervening, keep your interventions focused and get to the point as soon as possible, just to facilitate the discussion. That will be all as far as technical guidelines for this meeting. A recap is concerned. If I could just have the next slide, please, just to run you quickly through the agenda. So what is on the agenda for today? We'll start with some introductory remarks and an update on our road transport activities in 2022. And then we'll jump into immediately the session 1 on the return of the vehicle, where our colleagues from the European Commission will present the obligations related to the return of the vehicle, which will be followed by a questions and answers session. Then our second session will focus on regular weekly rests outside of the cabin, and we had foreseen a number of presentations in that session in relation to the presentation of the applicable obligations, on how they are enforced. We'll also touch base on the outcomes of the inspections activities during our weeks of action this year. And our colleagues from the communication team will also present you the key concepts of the ongoing campaign on road transport. The session will also be followed by a short Q&A session. Then we'll pause for a short break and we'll move on to the final session for today on the classification of infringements and European Road Register of Road Transport Undertakings. We aim to finish this session at 1 p.m. at the latest. So hopefully we will still have everyone's attention before they break for lunch. And just a quick reminder for the rest of you who have not been to our webinars before, if I can have the next slide, please. The previous trainings delivered and also this one will be available on our YouTube channel. So all the videos from the training sessions without the discussions part are subsequently being published in all EU languages on our YouTube website. So feel free to subscribe to get notified when new videos are being posted, or just keep a close eye on our YouTube channel to stay up to date with our activities. That being said, without further ado, I suggest we kick off the webinar, and I will now like to give the floor to Ms. Ewa Ptaszyńska, who's the Deputy Head of Unit of the Road Transport Unit in Director General MOVE. So Ewa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to kick off this workshop, one in the series of workshops organized by European Labour Authority together with DG MOVE. of the European Commission. So welcome everyone. I see quite a number of participants today. I would like just to set the context for the discussions, for all the presentations and discussions of today's meeting. And the context is implementation of Mobility Package 1. Mobility Package 1 as a whole is undeniably the most comprehensive modernization and perhaps also the most complex modernization of the legislative framework in the road transport sector, because it covers all key aspects of the functioning of the EU road transport market. That is social dimensions, social aspects. So all provisions related to working conditions of the driver, including remuneration for posted drivers, competition aspects, that is access to the profession, access to the international market, technical issues, which is out of scope of the mandate of the European Labour Authority, but because it's also part of the Mobility Package 1, I'm mentioning it here as well. And this is in particular about road charging rules and enforcement mechanisms and tools. And that is in particular smart tachograph and other tools and systems that we have prepared for operators and for member states to facilitate them implementation of the rules. In particular, I mean here internal market information system and the portal connected to this system to enable road transport operators to manage their posting information of their drivers. So all these provisions taken together aim at making EU road transport sector socially responsible, fairer, safer, more efficient. But obviously all these objectives would just remain ambitions on paper if there was no consistent and effective implementation and enforcement of these rules. And this requires joint efforts of member state authorities in the first instance, because they are responsible for day-to-day enforcement of the legislation, but also of sectoral organizations, social partners, and Commission services, and of course, European Labour Authority. I must say, to my great regret, that still some member states are lagging behind with adoption of the national measures, transposing certain parts of the Mobility Package 1, in particular posting of drivers' rules. And this is, of course, this transposition is, of course, crucial for ensuring the adequate remuneration for drivers on the one hand, and fair conditions of competition for operators on the other hand. And of course, the delays also affect the effective enforcement of the rules. So, as I said at the beginning, it's the most comprehensive and perhaps also complex framework of legislation or modernization of the road transport legislation. So member states are not left alone. Industry is not left alone, because the Commission services, and in some cases together with European Labour Authority, have been taking a number of actions to help member states to understand correctly the rules, to implement them and to enforce them. And let me just mention a few. So we issued a number of guidance notes and instructions or guidelines in the form of questions and answers. I think we have at least 7 or 8 set of questions and answers on new rules related to driving and resting times, including weekly rest, where the changes have been introduced via Mobility Package 1. We have Q&As on posting of drivers, on cabotage, on return of vehicle, etc., etc. So the work is going on in the Commission services together with our stakeholders in the posting of drivers expert group, in the enforcement group, and then Committee on Road Transport. So we have not yet finished this work. There are still some outstanding issues to be discussed and clarified. Apart from guidance, we also provided a lot of trainings, in particular to member states on how to use IMI system, but also to the sectoral partners, stakeholders, to representatives of road transport operators on how to use the portal connected to IMI. So-called road transport posting declaration portal. We issued a lot of fact sheets and And in cooperation with ELA in particular, we are involved in organizing and delivering the information sessions and workshops, webinars. And this webinar is one in the series of these support actions. I must underline here that this massive support to member states and the sector is on an unprecedented scale. So I think that thanks to this assistance to member states and the sector, Mobility Package 1 will become a flagship model for good implementation of the EU legislation and enforcement, efficient enforcement across the EU. And with this ambition, I leave you now listen to the specific presentations on dedicated elements of Mobility Package 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bartek, and colleagues. Good morning from a relatively gray Bratislava. Let me start by saying it's a pleasure to see so many of you attending this event. So looking at the count, 422, that's very impressive. So let me also warmly welcome you to yet another ELA training on this important, but I would say also very current and timely topic of road transport. So Bartek already did me the favor of introducing myself. Indeed, my name is Pedro Saras, and I'm responsible for enforcement and analysis here at ELA. I would like to leave a thank you word to Ms. Seva Paczynska. I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name, who's the deputy head of the road transport unit at DG Move, for the welcoming words and also for the cooperation. And of course, to thank also DG Move in general for the close cooperation as well, but also for the fruitful partnership we have established from the very beginning of ELA. So as you may know, colleagues, we at ELA are heavily invested in supporting activity in relation to road transport. And I believe this is clear not just from today's training session, which is a partnership, an internal partnership between the enforcement and analysis unit and the cooperation unit, but this is also visible, I would say, from other initiatives such as the workshop on road passengers that was organized last month, and that was also already said by Bartek, that you can find it on ELA's YouTube channel. So if I could have the next slide, please, just a few words on our objectives and the program. So colleagues, again, in 2022, ELA, in close cooperation with the European Commission, but also with other relevant authorities in the member states, the social partners, has put together a set of initiatives under what we called the ELA Framework for Action for Road Transport. And we've been mobilizing our resources to support the stakeholder community in this sector. So overall, if I can have the next slide, please. Overall, the objectives of ELA in the area of road transport are threefold, as you can see on the slides. And firstly, we wanted to address information gaps for both drivers and operators. Secondly, we also aimed to reinforce trust and cooperation amongst member states, but also to promote common understanding of the applicable rules by the competent member states authorities. And thirdly, with our activities, we also wanted to support the efficient enforcement of the rules by facilitating and supporting cross-border checks and inspection activities, but also by tackling fraudulent practices and undeclared work. So far, ELA's main activities under this framework for action have focused again on different aspects in regards to the provision of information. For example, ELA has prepared the EU-wide coordinated information and awareness raising campaign called Road to Fair Transport, which again aimed to address information gaps for drivers and operators. And this was launched this last October. And on this, my colleagues from the communication team will also present a little bit more to you and in more detail what these activities look like in session 2. But we also supported member states with enhancing the provision of information on their national websites. And we did it by developing toolboxes, by conducting website reviews as well. And together with the Commission, we're still working on revamping the Your Europe website. And finally, on this topic, our colleagues from the information team are also coordinating local information sessions, which we call roadshows, and national events dedicated to road transport, and all of this to maximize our efforts in our outreach. Secondly, on capacity building, and again, in order to reinforce trust and cooperation amongst member states, ELA has organized several training and knowledge sharing activities which related to the new legislation in road transport and to the use of joint tools for the exchange of information, such as webinars for inspectors, for example, on posting rules in road transport, a URES workshop on road transport again to exchange experiences in recruitment, or a workshop on passenger transport, the one that I referred to that took place last month. But we also did a mutual, or we are engaged in a mutual learning and understanding program, which is again dedicated to the IMI modules for posting of workers and road transport, which is now established and in full swing. Last but definitely not least, so the area that I'm more responsible for, enforcement. Here we have supported and helped to coordinate a significant number of inspections. Again, this aimed at enhancing enforcement of road transport rules. And during these activities, we have supported several roadside checks in multiple locations across Europe. Just the most recent one actually took place yesterday. But we've also facilitated bilateral engagements between national competent authorities and other relevant stakeholders in this area. But on this, again, you will hear more from my colleague and expert in this field, Seamus Lynch, again during session 2. Just to also briefly highlight a number of activities that we also did related to tackling undeclared work in road transport. These took place throughout the whole year with a particular focus on the transport of goods by light commercial vehicles, but also on preventing undeclared employment through some innovative approaches. So colleagues, as you can see, ELA did set an ambitious plan of activities for 2022. Obviously, these were aimed at addressing the challenges identified in this specific sector of road transport, and also to support, obviously, as much as possible, as Ms. have already also said, the implementation of the mobility package, which we indeed recognize, and I think it's widely recognized that it introduced significant changes to specific legislation in this sector. A little bit on the future. So in Q1 2023, we will aim at summarizing the lessons learned, but also the impact from the work done in the road transport sector in 2022. We will also prepare some follow-up activities with the objective of supporting member states again and other stakeholders for that matter regarding the main challenges that have been identified in this sector throughout the year. And we will, of course, continue our close cooperation and partnership with the European Commission. But I think we can safely say that our involvement in the road transport sector will continue in the years to come. So if I can have the last slide, this is where I'll finish my hopefully short introduction to this training and to ELA's actions in this sector. So colleagues, thank you all very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning to all. I'm really glad to see that there is such a big attendance and so much interest in what we're doing. This is an excellent sign. And indeed, the mobility package is here, and it has to be implemented by the member states. And we are doing everything we can to provide indication and guidance to the member states as to how to best and most efficiently implement it. And so here to start the day, I will give a presentation on one of the Q&A that we have adopted and very, very recently. I think it was published a few weeks ago, I think about 6 weeks ago. This is the Q&A on the rule of the return of the vehicle. So next slide, please. So I think you are all a bit familiar with the rule in Article 5.1b of Regulation 1071. So this is a new rule which requires the vehicles to return to the member state of establishment every 8 weeks. This is a rule, of course, that was very debated, but that has been adopted and now is part of the law and of the regulation and should be implemented by the member state. What is very important to note is that this rule is part in Regulation 1071 of the rule of establishment. So this is a requirement to have an effective establishment in the member state that has given the authorization. It's a requirement that the vehicle should return to this member state of establishment every 8 weeks. If it doesn't do that, then there is no proper establishment in the member state that has delivered the authorization. So next slide, please. So I get into the Q&A, and the first element that we wanted to clarify is which vehicle fall under the rule. So it can be a motor vehicle or a combination of vehicles used, of course, for the international carriage of goods for hire and reward. So this is the haulage part, but Regulation 1071 is also applicable to the transport of passengers. So it also applies to the motor vehicle constructed and equipped to be suitable for carrying more than 9 persons. And you see that sometimes this obligation is referred to as the return of the truck, but it doesn't only concern trucks because it applies also to the transport of passengers. So it's the return of the vehicle rules. The rule is not applicable to the trucks, for instance, that have laden mass below 2.5 tons. This is a general rule of Regulation 1071. Also, in certain cases, for transport that are made exclusively for non-commercial purpose, or when the undertaking has the main occupation other than that of the passenger transport operator. But these are general rule again of 1071, Regulation 1071, and also if it's a motor vehicle with a maximum authorized speed limit not exceeding 40 kilometers. So these are cases that are generally excluded from the application of Regulation 1071. Just to mention that, of course, it also applies to this rule on the return of the vehicle. So next slide, please. So where should the vehicle return? So as I was mentioning, it is part of the rule of establishment. So it has to be in one of the operational centers of the undertaking, but it has to be one of the operational centers which is located in the member state of establishment of the undertaking having the vehicle at its disposal. So to have its authorization, the undertaking should have a number of vehicles at its disposal in the member state of establishment, and the vehicle should return to one of this operational centers. The requirement is not fulfilled if the vehicle returns to a branch or a subsidiary in a member state other than the member state of establishment. Again, this is because the rule is about proper establishment. If the undertaking has several operational centers in the member state of establishment, the vehicle can return to any of the operational centers, and it can return one time to an operational center, another time to another operational center, provided again that they are in the member states of establishment. Next slide, please. So one thing which is not specified in the regulation is for how long should the vehicle return. So because the regulation doesn't say that it should be for a minimum duration, it can be for a short duration. But of course, the rules on driving time from Regulation 561/2006 should be complied with. So in practice, probably it will have to stay the night or a bit of time, but there's no rule. So it can be a short time. What is advisable, and it is also in the recital of the regulation, is that of course the return of the vehicle is used for the maintenance of the vehicle, maybe for technical inspection, and of course also it is advisable that it is used to carry or to make passengers or goods, to make a transport operation in the member state of establishment, so as not to return empty, and in order to optimize the operations. The other thing, of course, is that there is now also an obligation for the driver to return home at least every 4 weeks. And so, of course, 8 weeks is 2 times 4 weeks. So it can easily coincide with the obligation for the driver to return home. But there is no obligation for any of these elements. So it's just a possibility to optimize operation, to try to synchronize the return of the vehicle to other obligation or to other commercial commitments, of course. So next slide. How should the vehicle return? This is also not specified in the regulation. So it's possible to return by any possible mean. So it could be a train, ferry, auto transporter. It can be, of course, a train or ferry for part of the journey and not all. There is complete freedom as to how the vehicle should return. So next slide, please. So I come now to something important that we try to clarify in the Q&A, which is the calculation of the 8-week period. And we have a specific regulation applicable in the European Union, which is an old regulation from 1971, actually, which gives us some interesting indication as to the calculation of the period. So first, in the regulation 1071, the 8-week period, it's 8 weeks after leaving the member state. So after the departure from the member state of establishment. And so under the EU rules, this period of 8 weeks starts from midnight of the day following the exit of the vehicle from the member states of establishment and ends at the end of the same day. So the same day, the day following the exit of the 8th following week. So if, for example, the vehicle leaves the member state of establishment at any time on Tuesday, 29 of March, 2022, for instance, then it should be back to the operational center on the day after the Tuesday. So the Wednesday, 8 weeks after, 25 of May, 2022, at the latest at 11:59 p.m. So before midnight on the Wednesday. So when it leaves on a Tuesday, then the period, the calculation starts from the day after. And so if you leave the member state on a Tuesday, you should be returned on the Wednesday. So there is an infringement if on the first day you're not back, there is an infringement. So next slide, please. The same EU regulation also gives some clarification as to how public holidays and weekends are accounted for. And then if the last day of the period expressed in weeks is a public holiday, Sunday or Saturday, then the period ends with the expiry of the last hour of the following working days. So here, if the day where the vehicle have to return is a Sunday, for instance, then the vehicle has to be returned by the Monday. But then, of course, only the public holidays in the member state of establishment are relevant. Next slide, please. So now, of course, I come to which is the last part of the Q&A. It's about the enforcement and control of the obligation. And of course, this is of special importance for the national enforcement authority. So of course, the competent authorities of the member state where the transport undertaking is established are required to carry out the requisite checks. So it's for them primarily, of course, to check that the vehicle returned every 8 weeks. And again, this is an obligation which is part of the requirement of establishment. And it is primarily for the member state of establishment to check that the vehicle returned. But of course, the competent authorities of all the other member states where the vehicles are active have also a general competence to implement the regulation, and they should also check the compliance with that requirement. As to the way of checking, it's the general rules of checking an obligation which apply. There's no specific rules. So of course, all proportionate and effective means can be used by the regulators to check compliance with the obligation. The transport undertaking are required to produce clear evidence but they can use, of course, any evidence, and they can make the demonstration the way they want. What is important is to demonstrate that they have returned every 8 weeks. There's no constraining rules as to what can be used, what cannot be used. Anything can be used. So next slide, please. So how should the transport undertaking prove that it has fulfilled the obligation? So you have, of course, the roadside check. That will be the control by the member state where the undertaking is active primarily. And then the undertaking should have always the possibility to demonstrate compliance with the obligation at a later stage through documents and evidences available at the premises of the undertaking. So of course, it's possible that you don't have, during a roadside check, that you don't have all the elements to show that you have been back to the member states of establishment within 8 weeks. And then it's always, it should always be possible to provide other documents to the authority, to the control authority at a later stage. These are against common sense as to the demonstration of an obligation. There's no obligation to demonstrate immediately on the spot that you have done something. It can be done at a later stage. The relevant authority of the member states where the transport undertaking is established for this purpose, for the purpose of checking, have to cooperate with the other authority, the controlling authority, through the internal market information system. And I will come back to that because this is an important element. And of course, the complete assessment, because all the information is normally only available by the controlling authorities of the member state where the undertaking is established. So the complete assessment will be made in principle by the controlling authority of the member state of establishment. So any document showing the location of the vehicle at the place of establishment within the last 8 weeks or every 8 weeks can be used. For example, of course, the tachograph records, duty rosters of the drivers, or consignment notes. So next slide, please. So one important element is the tachograph, of course, because the tachograph can give excellent indication as to whether the vehicle has been back to the member state of establishment. And of course, for the vehicles fitted with a smart tachograph, tachograph data can be used to show that the vehicle returned not only to the member state of establishment, but precisely to one of the operational centers of the undertaking, which again is the precise obligation to return to this operational center. The control of the tachograph can take place during roadside check or check at premises. In case of a roadside check, the undertaking should always have the possibility to demonstrate compliance with the obligation at a later stage, again, through document and evidence available at the premises of the undertaking. This is an important element, so it is actually repeated in the Q&A to insist on this possibility. Next slide, please. So a very important element is the cooperation between member states, and I will end with that. But this is the final element, but not the less important. So again, when the data available in the vehicle or with the driver are not enough, the control should take place through the cooperation between the controlling authority of the member state where the undertaking is active and the competent authority of the member state where the undertaking is established. So this cooperation is an obligation under Article 18 of Regulation 1071. They have the obligation to cooperate closely and to swiftly provide one another with mutual assistance. And this is a general obligation, especially for the rules on establishment. The member state, the competent authorities of the member state of establishment should reply to the request for information from all the competent authorities of other member states. They should carry out checks and inspection and investigation also concerning compliance with the requirement generally of effective and stable establishment. So also, of course, of the rule of the return of the vehicle. And this obligation of cooperation is implemented through the internal market information system, which is established by Regulation 1024 2012. And so we have put in place a specific module within the internal market information system for the rules of establishment generally. And this module is in place and can be used since the beginning of the year. So since also the entry into force of this obligation in February of this year. And it should be used by the member states. So again, a controlling authority of the member states where the vehicle is active can and should ask any relevant questions to the authorities of the member state where the vehicle is established. And the authority of the member state where the vehicle is established have the obligation to provide assistance and reply to query of the other competent authority. So with this last obligation and this last part of the Q&A, I finish my presentation, and I think then we open the floor for questions.
Thank you. So hello, dear colleagues. It's first of all, I want to apologize a bit for my voice, which is due to a regular autumn cold here in Brussels. It's not difficult to catch it. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the regular weekly rest obligations stemming from the Mobility Package 1. So it will be a pretty short presentation, and I think the main point of this is that I will be referring extensively to the questions and answers documents or guidance notes, whatever name you know it after, that we have issued and posted on our website. So this is about 2 documents that were issued in 2 rounds, and they in detail explain all different questions, all different issues, all different nuances of the rules on regular weekly rest stemming from the Mobility Package 1. So today I will talk to you about a couple of most important things which are usually stemming the most interest. So first of all, I will talk about the definition of the regular weekly rest. Then I will try to explain what changed in terms of rest into consecutive weeks by Mobility Package 1. Then I will mention important elements of the spending regular weekly rest outside the vehicle. Then what's new about regular weekly rest on ferry or train. And finally, I will tackle one more specific issue, which is the proof of spending regular weekly rest outside the vehicle. So I think we can move with the first slide. So yes, I think what is most important to mention here about the weekly rest and the Mobility Package 1 is that actually, well, these rules are not really new and they have not much changed with the Mobility Package 1. The definition is not changed. What is different here is that Mobility Package 1 tried to harmonize, tried to simplify the rules, and tried to clarify what was not clear before. In terms of the very definition of the weekly rest, it stays the same as in Regulation 561 from 2006. So as we know in the article for H, it says that weekly rest period means the weekly period during which a driver may freely dispose of his time and covers the regular weekly rest period and reduced weekly rest period. Regular weekly rest period means any period of rest of at least 45 hours. I think we can move on with the next slide then. So what was amended in the rest into consecutive weeks by Mobility Package 1. So Mobility Package 1 amended the Article 8.6 of Regulation 561 by adding that by way of derogation from the first subparagraph, a driver engaged in international transport of goods may, outside the member state of establishment, take 2 consecutive reduced weekly rest periods, provided that the driver in any 4 consecutive weeks takes at least 4 weekly rest periods, of which at least 2 shall be regular weekly rest periods. And another novelty, where 2 reduced weekly rest periods have been taken consecutively in accordance with the 3rd subparagraph of paragraph 6, the next weekly rest period shall be preceded by a rest period taken as compensation for those 2 reduced weekly rest periods. This is in detail, and all different elements about this and the nuances is explained in both of our guidance notes or Q&A documents. In the first Q&A document, you will find it under the question 8. In the second Q&A document, you will find it under questions 6 and 7. I think we can move on to the next slide, please. Then another issue about spending regular weekly rest outside the vehicle. This was ruled by the court by the case of 102/16 of 20 December 2017, and the ECJ ruled that Article 8.6 and 8 of Regulation 561 must be interpreted as meaning that the driver may not take the regular weekly rest periods referred to in Article 8.6 in his vehicle. All questions around these different dimensions are explained again in both of our Q&A documents. In the first one, you will find it under the question 11, and in the second one, you'll find it under questions 4 and 5. Next slide, please. So here I just quoted basically the different copy pasted from different regulations. So as I mentioned, following the judgment of the court, Mobility Package 1 amended Article 8.8 accordingly, specifying clearly that it is not allowed to spend regular weekly rest inside the vehicle. So you have it here that paragraph 8 is replaced by the following: the regular weekly rest periods and any weekly rest period of more than 45 hours taken in compensation for previous reduced weekly rest periods shall not be taken in the vehicle, and they shall be taken in suitable gender-friendly accommodation with adequate sleeping and sanitary facilities, and any cost for this should be covered by the employer versus so before the court's ruling, the provision was the following: where a driver chooses to do this, the daily rest periods and reduced weekly rest periods away from base may be taken in a vehicle as long as it has suitable sleeping facilities for each driver and the vehicle is stationary. So this is the main novelty. Different nuances around this, different questions are explained again in both of our Q&A documents. So in the first one, it's under the question 11, and the second one under the questions 4 and 5. So now we can move it. I basically, I don't know whether this should be translated because the legislation is available in all EU languages, but here I just provided really the screenshots from the legislation, how it was written before the court ruling, how it was written after. So following the court ruling that I mentioned previously, which said that regular weekly rests cannot be spent inside the vehicle. So this is just, it's written here how it was changed. So the difference is that now the paragraph 8 of Article 8 specifically mentions that regular weekly rests cannot be spent inside the vehicle, that any cost for accommodation outside the vehicle shall be covered by the employer, and that the accommodation should be suitable gender-friendly accommodation with adequate sleeping and sanitary facilities. Whereas before the court ruling, it was written that daily rest periods and reduced weekly rest periods away from base may be taken in a vehicle as long as it has suitable sleeping facilities for each driver and as long as the vehicle is stationary. So we can refer here for more details to both of our Q&A documents. In first one, this will be the question 11, and the second one, questions 4 and 5. I think we can move then to the next slide about regular weekly rest on ferry or train. So the novelty here is that Mobility Package 1 introduced in Article 9 the possibility to interrupt also regular weekly rest periods. And before, it was possible to interrupt only regular daily rests. So again, here is a snapshot from the legislation after it has been amended with the Mobility Package 1. More details around this can be found in our Q&A document, the first one, under the question 7. If it helps, I can also maybe for interpretation read out what is the exact content of the snapshot from the legislation. So it says, by way of derogation from Article 8, where a driver accompanies a vehicle which is transported by ferry or train and takes a regular daily rest period or a reduced weekly rest period, that period may be interrupted not more than twice by other activities not exceeding 1 hour in total. And during that regular daily rest or reduced weekly rest period, the driver shall have access to a sleeper cabin, bunk or a couchette at their disposal. And with regard to regular weekly rest periods, the derogation shall only apply to ferry or train journeys where the journey is scheduled for 8 hours or more, and where the driver has access to a sleeper cabin in the ferry or in the train. So I think now we can move on to the last slide, please, which is about one particular issue of proof of spending a regular weekly rest outside vehicle as per Article 34.3 of Regulation 165 from 2014. So here we would like to stress once again that member states shall not impose on drivers a requirement to present form attesting to their activities while away from the vehicle. So they cannot ask them this. This article really reflects the need to ensure fair competition in the internal road transport market and the enforcement of applicable rules. But at the same time, the aim is to avoid the disproportional restrictions to the freedom to provide road transport services and disproportionate interference with the privacy of the drivers. So really here it was the main aim to strike the balance between these. So really competition in internal road transport market, enforcement of applicable rules, but at the same time, freedom to provide road transport services and privacy of the drivers. Imposing additional burden of proof on the drivers, such as hotel bill, proving that their regular weekly rest was not spent in the vehicle cannot be justified on the grounds of overriding public interest, as it does not appear necessary nor proportionate as a measure. For more guidance how to apply the ban to take a regular weekly rest in cabin, again, you can refer to our Q&A documents. Here I'm referring to the Q&A document 1, and this is under the question 6. So this would be that from me in terms of the regular weekly rest periods.
Good morning to all. So thank you for the invitation to participate to the effort here in trying to indeed, well, train everyone in different sectors and try to, as much as possible, as mentioned also by Eva and Lana, to make sure that the changes in the mobility package are first understood in the same way then, and this is our role in CORT, and we're glad to contribute to this effort, to make sure or try to support a harmonized enforcement of these rules. So next slide, please. So as you have seen, as said by Bartek, I will focus here the presentation on the ban of the weekly rest, regular weekly rest taken in the cabin, and how to enforce this ban as well as possible. So here's the outline of presentation. So a few words about CORT, so you know where we are working from. The ban itself, as mentioned by Lana, but I'll come back to the basics. A few questions about enforcing the ban. So what about enforcing the ban, and what are the challenges, in fact, in doing so? Then under point 4, all this will not be too long, do not worry. A number of guidelines on the enforcement. So this is the core, let's say, substance of the presentation, are the guidelines here under number 4. And then I will end the presentation with recommendations linked to broader issues, I would say, that define the environment in which this ban and the enforcement of this ban has to be understood. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, as said by Bartek, just for those of you who do not know CORT, so we are an association putting together ministries of transport enforcement entities. This is the core element. So this is the E in the word CORT. We focus on the enforcement of the rules, understood as the good, let's say, application or the useful application of the rules as they exist. To do so, we try to put together public authorities together with association and observers, such as, among others, those of you who are here, associations such as ETF and observers as IRU, and Oleg is here representing today the IRU. Next slide, please. So we put everybody together, public and private, I would say, focus on enforcement, work with the authorities to, as I said, and this is, and then I'll come to the enforcement of the ban. First, understand the rules in the same way, and we all know that the mobility packages have introduced quite a number of rules, and we need to make sure for, I think, still quite a long period, unfortunately, or not, but this is natural, to make sure that authorities in the whole community share a common understanding. So this is still, I think, one of the basic challenges of this year, and I would say of next year, even if some would think this is taking time, is to make sure that the rules are understood in the same way. Understood in the same way means also being enforced in the same way. To do so, we try to do this in CORT through our working groups, and this was mentioned by Eva and Oleg just now. We also are working with our partners in coordinating the Trace2 project. So many of you are involved in this work. We'll hear about our results, which are starting to be produced these days in the Trace2 project, covering the changes of the mobility package. Next slide, please. So now, when it comes to the ban itself, and this I will be fast because Lana from the Commission just mentioned this, the ban of the weekly rest, regular weekly rest taken in the cabin. This was clarified by the Court of Justice, then confirmed by the mobility package. Now in CORT, as we often do, we identified through our members and through the questions they had in the field, a difficulty, I would say, in enforcing, in fact, this obligation, this ban. So what we did is to put together a small working group, initially with a few countries. These were in 2019, so it goes back a little bit in time. Denmark, Hungary, Netherlands, and the UK, to understand how, at the time, the ban could be enforced, given the challenges that it supposes. We produced, and I'll come to the core substance of the guidelines in a moment, in 2009. These guidelines, we try to review them every year, try to see whether they match reality, and then trying to use the feedback that we would get today, but that we get also, I think, practically on a daily basis, of how to improve or help with these bans, the enforcement of this ban. We also try to do a survey where we keep up to date with how countries, in fact, enforce the ban itself. So next slide, please. So at the very start of the work that started in 2019, but I think the questions are somewhat quite relevant, even though many have been clarified also with the help of DG Move and ELA. The same questions seem to come back. So this is where we have to continuously, I think, work on the subject. There are a few questions that the enforcers initially were asking themselves. So is it possible to enforce this ban without having to catch the driver in the act? questions related to when to intervene, so when the driver is asleep, what to do, questions related to the proof and the evidence. This is of course key to the enforcement operations. What type of evidence should be asked? What happens if there's no evidence? What is the relation to the suitable parkings? This is a big question, of course. And then what is the relation of the ban with, in fact, the checking of driving and resting time? So these are core, let's say, questions that have guided us in trying to produce recommendations to help enforcers to enforce this ban. Again, knowing the difficulties of doing this, taking reality into, of course, perspective, and trying to do this in the best possible way. So to do so, next slide, please. I'll go through the recommendations themselves. And we're glad to circulate to a wider audience also the document itself that basically replicates but explains a little bit further all the points that I will mention here. So I'll go through the different guidelines now, the sections of these guidelines. So first, the burden of proof, basic thing. So some of these elements will seem simple, but we would like to insist on every aspect. So first, it is for the enforcers to that the burden of proof, the burden of proof lies with the enforcement. So it's for them to prove. Also important part is that we would like to insist on the fact that a lot of the work with enforcers relate to the interaction with drivers. So one should not forget that the first thing to do for an enforcer on the road is to go for an interaction with the driver and trying to settle, let's say, or introduce a conversation, a good communication with the driver. This is essential to any enforcement practice. Next slide, please. So after a burden of proof, I mentioned this evidence. What type of evidence can be asked? This was mentioned also by Lana just now. So tachograph records are, of course, as in social legislation in general, always key. Also important to insist on the second point here. Member states cannot require drivers to produce documents proving that their regular weekly rest preceding the roadside inspection was not spent in the vehicle. So if there's no document produced by the driver to prove that the driver has slept somewhere else, it cannot be forced upon the driver. Evidence can, however, be accepted if presented spontaneously by the driver, but the fact of the driver not presenting any documentation to prove that the rest has been taken outside of the vehicle should not lead to suspicion, because there's no obligation for the driver to do so. Also important aspect, the last bullet point here, a rest of at least 45 hours must have been taken by the driver. 45 minutes have been taken by the driver to allow the enforcement action. Next slide, please. So burden of proof, evidence. This is an important point too. This is, I think, part of the enforcement action. The action has to be taken on the spot and the driver has to be caught in the act. So it's very difficult, of course, to do this in company check. Some things are possible at roadside, some things are possible at company level. Here, the drivers ideally have to be caught on the spot and in the act. The interaction with the driver, which has to start with a, let's say, conversation, discussion, good communication, has to start with when the driver is awake. So our recommendation here is not to interrupt the sleep, the rest taken by the driver, but the interaction has to start when the driver is actually awake, where enforcers basically witness movement in the vehicle and can establish that the driver is not sleeping. So the driver is outside of the vehicle, for instance. If there's an interaction between the enforcement and the driver, this should be duly noted so that if the driver afterwards is checked, it can show that the enforcement has happened recently. Next slide, please. So burden of proof, evidence, caught in the act, and then sleep and rest. I mentioned this, I'll mention it again here because it is important. Enforcers should not interrupt the rest of the driver. And only drivers that are awake should be engaged in the roadside inspection. Next slide, please. Now, this is also important, and I think this relates to the intelligence enforcers need to use. Most and many are really aware of how to use this type of intelligence. They would know where the difficult parking lots, the difficult spots are, and where typically a fraud could happen. So they would know, for instance, locations not offering appropriate facilities or locations just because of the transit routes that they would know where this infringement could happen. So this is part of the intelligence to target enforcement in terms of location, but also in terms of time. So typically many member states have mentioned that they work on the enforcement of this ban on Monday mornings when the driver resumes the duties of the week. So this is important to keep in mind, targeted enforcement to make the most of the time of the enforcers. So this is important. Next slide, please. Certainty given the difficulties to enforce this. So I mentioned a few. It's a balance between what is possible and what is not. So when it comes to an actual fine, imposing a fine upon the driver for non-respect of this obligation, there should be no doubt at all as to whether the regular weekly rest has been taken in the vehicle. So any doubt should not lead to a fine, given, again, the difficulties of enforcing this obligation on the road. Next slide, please. Procedure, this is also a general principle, but is important, but we've heard from some member states that indeed there are difficulties in enforcing this because of different treatment that this ban would receive. So it's important to remind enforcement authorities that this should correspond to basically the procedures in place to this type of infringements and to national law. So not make something very special of this ban, but try to treat it in the same way as other infringements are treated. Next slide, please. Fines, of course, it is for member state to establish the level of fine of penalties. Appropriate, it needs to be considered appropriate fines. We've also discussed this with the court members, with national enforcement authorities. They came to a conclusion that unless otherwise justified, so unless there's clear, very strong infringement and the case is very difficult, the prohibition or immobilization of the vehicle itself is not something that should be done, so should be avoided. Of course, sometimes it has to be done, but it should not, all infringements to this ban should not lead to prohibition of the vehicle. Next slide, please. So here, I tried to be somewhat fast. I went through the different pieces of the enforcement guidelines, breaking the guidelines into different elements. So you've seen them all. So I'm glad to circulate also a document where this will be repeated. Now, I would like to put these guidelines in perspective in relation with, I would say, broader questions, issues that relate to the environment in which this ban has to be controlled. So first is the big question of the availability of the parking lots themselves. We know that there's unfortunately a lack of parking and suitable parking places for drivers in the EU. So this is a clear, let's say, problem that reinforces the difficulty of this ban and reinforces the problem that drivers do not find places to rest, appropriate places. So in many countries, they do choose, and we've put this down also in the survey, instead of going somewhere unsecure with no facilities, countries have told us that yes, it's true that often drivers just choose to sleep in the cabin because it is more comfortable. So this is a clear, let's say, issue. It goes beyond what we are looking at today because it goes into, well, critical infrastructure and road infrastructure. So it's a large subject, but the enforcement of the ban has to be also perceived in the perspective of the availability of the parking areas, again, relating to the targeting, also the enforcement and enforcers knowing where these facilities are or are not. Fair working conditions, of course, this is central. I've mentioned it now, for the drivers to be able to sleep, to take it in suitable places. The enforcement of the ban is there to, will help the drivers improve the situation so that companies organize themselves so that the drivers can rest in suitable areas. So anything, in fact, that would be identified at roadside, as always, should lead, if there are any problems, structural problems or repeated problems, infringements that are identified at roadside, should lead to further investigation, typically at company level. So it's important that the actions taken by the enforcers at the roadside are related to what could happen after, and related to company inspection. So it's important to follow up this. So parking areas, fair working conditions, and then an important part is, and we tend sometimes to forget about this, is the education and communication. We've seen this across the EU. It is useful for the enforcement authorities, as always, to inform as much as possible about their practices, but also about the rules themselves. So to do so, for instance, in this specific case, and it is a specific case, what is useful is to, for instance, have the enforcers on site where they know that infringements have happened and where the problem exists, to, for instance, disseminate, give flyers to the drivers so that first they would know about their rights, they would know that there is a ban, and they would also know about how the enforcers that are acting in this environment would act. So this is a very important part. To have the enforcement authorities take initiatives, and I think ELA is very active also in this, to trying to inform the drivers and the company inside. So not to distribute these flyers, let's say, in meetings, but really go on site and try to communicate the information directly to the drivers. This is something that can, we believe, help a lot. Last point, and this is a tricky one, is to, as much as possible, and we know that this is not easy, is to dissociate the fact of checking the ban from the actual, I would say, complications or difficulties of calculating driving and resting time. So as I said, there has to be certainty as to whether the ban has been the obligation has not been respected. So to see whether the time spent in the cabin indeed indicates non-compliance, but this work has to be dissociated from the other complications or difficulties of calculating driving and resting time. So as much as possible to see the ban dissociated from all the other issues and calculation of driving and resting time. So I know this is a borderline because you need to establish a certain level of calculation and knowing what has happened, the activities of the driver, but we would like to make the issue of enforcing this ban somewhat separate from the calculation of resting time rules themselves. So this, I think, marks the end of the presentation. So again, I went through the efforts that CORT is doing together with DG Move, with ELA, in the context also of the Trace2 project, which I hope will help also the community to, again, help the enforcement authorities enforce the ban. So we do know that this is a difficult subject, that not everything is perfect, as in other fields, but we do hope also that this is, let's say, a contribution to how to make the situation better. And as mentioned here in the recommendations at the end of the presentation, I think we need to take into account a number of larger issues, but to tackle the issue, and this is what we were trying to do in a very practical way. So to get the feedback from the authorities is always useful. To get the feedback from the industry, from drivers, is key, so that we can basically tailor, or let's say adapt the guidelines, for instance, in this case, to the reality of what is happening. So thank you very much for the time.
Thanks very much to all our previous speakers. I see we're almost 10 minutes behind, so I will try not to delay it much further. So if you could move us on to the next slide, please. So yeah, I've just introduced myself first to everybody, people who don't know me. My name is Seamus Lynch, and I am working in the inspections unit of the enforcement pillar here at ELA. As many of you know, you've all heard me before talking about our weeks of action throughout the year that we have supported. Our more recent one was the one in October. And as you can see from the slide there that we have up, we had 7 member states who hosted observers from 15 other member states. The hosting member states in October were Belgium, Bulgaria, Denmark, Finland, France, Romania, and Slovakia. And then we had observers attending all of these inspections, which included the member states Belgium, Czechia, Denmark, Spain, France, Croatia, Ireland, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Sweden, and Slovakia. So as you can see there, we had 5 out of the 7 hosting member states also took an observing role at other concerted and or joint inspections. So in total, we had 15 participating member states during this particular week of action. So the next slide, please. So not only, the statistics from that particular week of action, there were 263 vehicles checked. We had control officers more than 95, including 41 observers from other member states. 16 ELA staff were also present at these inspections, and the number of infringements detected were more than 118, which resulted in over 55 fines. Next slide, please. The usual, as you can see from this slide, the usual list of infractions, which included the use of the tachograph, driving and resting times. There was also a number of irregularities in relation to posted workers, along with a couple of cases in relation to social dumping. Next slide, please. So this slide here gives us an overview of the 3 weeks of action. We've got our February, June, and October here on this slide. The purple bar is the actual hosting member state. The dark blue is the number of observing member states, and the one in gray is the participating member states. So as you can see there, in February, we had a total of 11 participants. There were 4 hosting member states and 7 observers. In June, we had 17 participants in total, which was made up of there were 7 hosts and 13 participants. But when one factors in the hosting member states, which also attended as observers, the number of participants is 17. And I've already outlined the numbers that we had in October. So quite a good number of participants there overall during the year. And the next slide, please. the month of October, actually the end of September, month of October was quite a busy period for us. In addition to our weeks of action, we also provided support and coordinated joint inspections outside the week of action. At the end of September, we had one in Germany where observers attended from Austria and Poland. In Belgium on the 4th of October, we also supported this one where we had observers from Lithuania and Estonia. And then in Croatia, a 2-day event, the 25th and 26th of October, there were observers present from Latvia, Slovakia, Belgium, Slovenia, and Malta. And as recently as yesterday, there was another inspection. Yesterday, Sunday, the 13th of November, and I just checked, they have a press release which was issued this morning, and I see that this particular inspection involved there was 129 trucks were inspected, and there was concentration on the topics which we've just been discussing here earlier today: the weekly rest in the cabin, the return of the vehicle, and the return of the driver. And I note from the report that there were 12 violations detected in relation to the taking of the weekly rest in the cabin. There were 4 violations detected against the return of the vehicle and 2 against the return of the driver. And just a summary of the total breaches detected yesterday: 19 in relation to social legislation, 10 violations were specific to driving and resting times. There were 9 tachograph infringements, 1 cargo securing infringement, 1 case of diesel fraud, and 1 driver who could not present a transport permit. The total value of the fines that were issued yesterday came to €37,249. I think Fred and Rubens, who are both from the Federal Police in Belgium, are present here today. So maybe later, when we get a chance for you to ask questions or whatever, they'll be glad to answer any particular questions that you might have on yesterday's inspection. So going to the next slide, please. Yeah, you'll have heard Pedro talk earlier about a series of roadshows which we are organising at the moment. The first one of these, we're organising 5 in total. The first one took place at the same week as we launched our information campaign on the 12th of October. The purpose of these roadshows is to disseminate practical information about the new rules in relation to the mobility package, specifically focusing on the posting of drivers and driving and resting times. And we also use this opportunity to distribute the information leaflets which we put together in conjunction with the Commission, leaflets giving information on the posting of drivers and driving and resting times. Our next roadshow will take place in Lithuania. It'll be towards the end of this month, and the one after that will be early December in Latvia. And then there is also one planned for Q1 of 2023, maybe a combined one, I think, between Poland and Germany. So that's it from the inspections for the moment. But I'd just like to say that in relation to 2023, just before I finish up here, that we first of all, I'd like to thank Roadpol for their cooperation to date and look forward to working with them next year. They've already earmarked 3 particular weeks for which we can join forces and help to support and coordinate more inspections during 3 specific weeks of action. They will take place in February, May and November. I think February is the 13th to the 19th, May the 8th to the 14th, and November the 6th to the 12th. But I mean, we did find during the year that these are quite challenging events to coordinate because of the high numbers of interest, which is great. But we'd just like to encourage member states that maybe you don't have to wait for or to request the support from ELA during these particular 3 weeks. We are available, our services are available right throughout the calendar year, January to December. So maybe, obviously you'll be having many more roadside checks throughout the year, and there probably will be lots of cases where there will be suspected irregularities, be they letterbox companies or to do with posting. We can help, in the follow-up of them, because as you all know about our national liaison officers, we've got one in every member state. So this can help take the burden of, trying to organize the follow-up that may be required in relation to these particular kind of topics. So please do remember that. And that's it. I'll leave it there for the moment. So I'll hand back to you, Bartek.
Many thanks indeed, Seamus, for your presentation. I believe it shows everyone how active we are in the field, supporting the member states and for enforcement of the obligations stemming from the mobility package in the road transport sector. But what Seamus also, I think what's quite evident from Seamus's statistics that he presented is that also enforcement is not just the key to all of the problems, it's also about the right to available information. And in ELA, we're also working very closely with the European Commission to make sure that the information on obligations and rights, both for the drivers and operators, are available in user-friendly language in all official languages in the EU, to combine what also Remy was mentioning, the aspect of the enforcement and the education, as those need to go hand in hand. So another opportunity in which we engage directly with drivers and operators are the so-called roadshows that already took place this year, and more is to come next year. So whenever you hear more information about the roadshow, please do express your interest to participate in those, though we are getting very positive feedback about those events. And if you require any further assistance from the colleagues from the inspections team, or you have any questions in relation to how you can submit a case to the European Labour Authority for inspections, do not hesitate to reach out to us via the email shown on the slide. Now, coupling the enforcement and information activities, I think it's a great bridge that we can make to the third presentation from this session.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. Very good to be in this meeting, and thank you, Bartek, for giving us the floor. I hope the sound is fine. Some of you know us already. Me and Rastislav, we are working as the campaign team for ELA at this moment, and have been already informing quite a lot about this campaign, and we will be happy today to share where we are now. So you may go to the next slides. Thank you. And as Pedro already said this morning when we started, it's all part of this ELA framework for action of road transport, where we are in the middle of it, and we're actually approaching the end of the year, so a lot has been going on. I told in previous meetings that we have so much to campaign about. We have already like a legislative package which we could probably campaign about one whole year, but this campaign is then approximately 1 to 2.5 months running in the end when we reach Christmas time. And for this campaign, we have the main objectives is that to provide valuable information for this particular legislation to both employers and employees, and also to raise awareness on the benefits of declared work. Main scope of the campaign so far is also the posting of drivers directive and the driving arresting time regulation. But as you might have seen already, we also touch upon the tachograph and the enforcement activities. The main target group still is only like the road transport operators and road transport employees. But in the end, we use a lot of in our materials, we use a lot of time the words the drivers and the operators. And yeah, be with us because we have to be very precise in the messages. And as this campaign is running in like only 1 to 3 months, 1 to 3, the short period, we can't like touch up all the elements and all the different target audiences. So that's why we just briefly wanted to repeat here that this is the scope for this campaign. So you may go to the next slide. So it all started in the beginning of this year with a target audience analysis, which we actually wrote in-house. We've been doing a lot of work to maintain, to really find out where to find also of how to reach the target audience and where they really are, because it's not a secret that this target audience for this campaign is a moving group. I mean, we just can't, we are not Coca-Cola and doing a very easy, we're just doing a very easy campaign on one product. We're actually campaigning on a very tough political sensitive legislative package. And therefore, we're very happy now also to share with you today where we are today and to see that we actually have been choosing the particular angles of particular messages together with you, because we needed to be very sure like where to reach the right people, what will be the right messages. And in particular, the whole part of the key messages has been really time consuming, because we really wanted to make sure that sorry, there are just popping up some chats that I see in my screen as well. And we really wanted to make sure that we really, in this short period of campaigning, that we at least get out with a couple of very strong, powerful messages, which all will help us to understand the legislative package and also the end user to let. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to turn off the chat. Maybe someone can turn off the chat for me, but it's okay. So the key message has been very, very special period for us in the summertime to really land the key messages which we are now then communicating out. Sorry, you may go to the next slide. We also had a very good internal cooperation there. So for this moment, the campaign coordination, the campaign partner group we established has been actually set up last November, December by the members of the information working group. So the people who are now in our closest campaign circle, let's say it like that, these people have been appointed. And right now we have a group of 50 to 70 people joining our campaign network. And in addition, we have very much contact now with the colleagues from DG Move and DG Employment, DG Grow. And of course, we're very happy with the EU social partners also are representing today in the meeting here. And we have an ELA internal horizontal group, which we actually have been working quite a lot with to land these campaign messages the past months. And of course, our internal communication team for ELA. So this is like a bit the setup for now. But anyway, we always are, of course, very happy to be in touch with other people too. So if you should have additional questions after the meeting today, in the end of the presentation, we will have our email address where you can reach us. So you may go to the next slide. It all started 12th of October, like Seamus already said. That day we had a press conference with our executive director. The same week we had the roadshow. We had the first inspection week, or that inspection week taking place. And at that day, we also launched a particular campaign website. I hope you all follow our ELA website, and in the top you will see a tab where you can click on, where you will see the dedicated campaign website, which we are updating gradually every time we have something new. We also have been then setting up a Circa BC, our shared platform where we share most communication materials with our campaign partners. But we also have a lot of campaign materials available at our website. So you can just look at the campaign website, and there you will also see under the tab campaign, the road transport campaign, you will find some of our materials, and Rastislav will inform a bit more about the campaign materials later. We hope you all are following already our ELA social media channels and that you reshare where possible the content we are posting there. You are welcome, of course, to make your own posts, and please use our campaign hashtag Road to Fair Transport. We're actually using it a lot ourselves, and we see many are using it too, but feel welcome to continue using it. In addition, we thought, originally we thought the campaign would maybe run in 1 month, but as we saw, we had so much to campaign about. We now are there that we have a campaign running from the 12th of October until Christmas time. So we stop around 2 weeks before the end of the year. And yeah, we think we have a lot of posting going on, and hope you all, like I said before, have seen some of it before and are actively following it. So you can move on to the next slide. Here you see just a couple of examples of our social media posts. And we try to be very direct to both the two different target audiences we've been discussing or deciding on together, the operators and the drivers. And we can move on to the next slide. So to make it a campaign which actually has a good structure, we suddenly thought it would be really good to do a thematic approach, that we are touching upon the different topics throughout the entire campaign period. And right now we are entering week number 6, so we are actually halfway through. And the first weeks we have been we have been campaigning about the posting of drivers in the driving and resting time. There we have already 3 huge, like longer videos out, the campaign general video and the posting of drivers, and the one on the driving and resting times. And we are expecting 2 more campaign videos later. Therefore, we have both the tachograph and the enforcement topic twice. But we will actually be reusing a lot of the materials of the first weeks in the last weeks of the campaign. So for your information, this is just an overview. We are halfway. We have been posting at least 3-4 times a week on our main ELA channel. And we are making progress to continue the path the coming weeks to close this in around Christmas time. So then the next slides. I would like to remind you of our website. The website is, as you see in the middle, on the top, you see the tab campaigns. And of course, there's also a call for action to just look to our main ELA website, but for the campaigns, you can find it on the tab on the top, you will see it. And we are uploading there also the videos we have already been uploading to the social media channels. And we will be also adding more things there later. And I would also like you, if you go to the next slide, would remind you of the other very important page. It's the Your Year portal. All our videos do have reference to the Your Year portal, because we all know that the most essential and important updated information of the Your Year portal of the campaign and of the campaign topics is on the Your Year portal too. So we are really trying to link these two in every possible way. As it is very important that we have a very clear line in what we inform about. And we also have 2 separate shorter videos actually dealing about where to find the information on the Your Year portal. So it's just a very good interconnection. And at our campaign website, we do have a lot of links, both to the Q&A from DG Move, and we have also at the campaign website, we also have the link to your portal. You can just have a look and see. We will really update it whenever possible with more information. So for this moment, it's a very broad, trying to be as calm as possible campaign update, but we are thrilled to work with this, and we are looking forward to the past weeks. Hope you also appreciate the work, like the post you and the content you've seen so far. We've been really carefully chosen the topics, and I'm happy to give the floor to my colleague Rastislav now for the further update on this topic.
Hello, everyone. We can go to the next slide so that we start shortly with my part. So I will guide you a bit through our communication products that we are using during the campaign and how they can be used also by you to raise awareness among your networks and your colleagues. We can go to the next slide. The first thing that has been devised and prepared are obviously the campaign leaflets. Seamus has already mentioned that they exist and they are available on our website. They are available in individual news, but also on the campaign web page. We obviously have the topics of the driving and resting times, and then about the posting of drivers. We have them available in all EU languages, plus some additional ones, such as Ukrainian, Macedonian, Albanian, Turkish, and Russian. And we will be having additional languages coming up in 2 weeks' time. They are currently being prepared, and we will be then updating the website and probably also informing the broad public through our social media network. Those will be mostly the Central Asian languages, and we will also have Serbian and Bosnian. As also mentioned on the slide, they are available in print and web formats. So whether you want to use them to disseminate online or in physical form, they are available and present. We can go to the next slide. As every good campaign, ours also has its distinctive logo. So we try to be rather simple so that it's easily distinguishable and that everyone can basically realize that the products or the events that are happening are part of the campaign. We have chosen the main ELA colors, and this is basically the logo which has been in use and then also translated into the hashtag. So the Road to Fair Transport is our both slogan, logo, and the hashtag. And we are very happy to see that also some of the member states are actually using the logo and doing their own activities. So this is also a callback to our campaign partners, for whom we are very grateful. We can continue. Another very important part in dissemination is obviously the posters. So we have chosen 4 basic taglines, which have then a bit of an additional information underneath. So these are the 4 main campaign posters. We have them currently available on the web only in English, but we are in the process of receiving the individual language versions as well. So just like with the leaflets, they will be available in all EU languages, as well as some additional ones that we already have, such as the Ukrainian or Macedonian, for example. In each of the posters, there is also the QR code, which is leading people to the campaign website where we have all the information available. And as Marina already mentioned, on the website, we are trying to update it regularly. And we also have there the Q&A document prepared by the Commission. We also have there a link to the Euro portal, and we have all the videos available. So talking about the videos, we can go to the next slide, and I will brief you a bit more about them. Even one, yeah, perfect. So for the campaign, we have decided to go in 2 directions with the videos. We have main 5 campaign videos. One of them is an overarching one, which is introducing all the topics which the campaign is tackling, but also the topics ELA is dealing with. And then we have the 4 individual longer ones, which are dealing with the topics one by one. So we have a video on the posting of drivers, on the driving and resting time rules, on enforcement activities, and on the tachograph. So far, you could have seen 3 of these videos. 2 more of them are coming up. I can already tell you that the one on enforcement activities will be made available next week. So we are really looking forward also to your reactions. We also see that most of the videos are actually being shared, and by the views, we are quite happy with the reach that we are getting. So that's also a good feedback for us, I would even say. But to tell you a bit more about the videos themselves. So the contents have been basically devised internally with our expert group and horizontal group, and we have also consulted our campaign partners and DG Move on the scripts. So we really tried to stick to the topic. And while we are not going into all the technical details, we do consider that we are touching upon the mobility package in a broader sense, and we are trying to explain and raise awareness by also inviting people to then read further information on the relevant websites. All the longer videos are with English voiceover and have available subtitles in all EU languages. So when you go to our YouTube portal or YouTube channel, sorry, you can always choose in the settings the subtitles that you would wish for your own country. And these videos can then be played at even your own activities, such as physical events, meetings, or workshops, such as this one, for example. We can continue. So here, just to give you a bit of an overview of how the videos actually look like. So we tried to be a bit more creative with the content so that we do not have just real footage, but we also have animated one. This format is actually a live footage then translated into the animated format, which is not so relevant for you, but just so that you know that we tried to stick to the topic as much as we could and make it very relevant for the road transport itself. We are also distinguishing the individual topics by individual colors. So the first one is obviously very general, and then the second, third, fourth, and fifth have all their distinctive color based on the topic they're representing. So the first row you could have already seen on our social media, and the two others are coming up in the coming weeks. We can go to the next slide. Part of the video campaign that we are running are our short videos. Most of those have been already put on our social media. We are very happy that we managed to find the topics which are also represented in the logo videos. So the idea is basically that we are going in a cascade, like a main overarching video, then the individual videos, and then the short videos explaining the topics even more. The short videos are between 25 to 50 seconds, so anyone can find the time to look at it. And at the end of each video, we have a call to action to visit your Europe portal, as we know that the most up-to-date information is always available there. These videos are also on our YouTube channel. And the specialty about these short videos is that we actually have them appearing on the screen with the text in individual EU languages, but we have chosen the 12 based on our target audience analysis that Marina was previously mentioning. So we have the individual versions in Bulgarian, German, Spanish, French, Italian, Lithuanian, Latvian, Dutch, Polish, Romanian, Slovak, and Slovenian. These videos are already uploaded to YouTube, so they are shareable, they can be found, and all of them are even visible. As Marina was mentioning, since we had thematic week approach in the campaign, we always only made available a few of those, but since we went through the first round, everything is now basically available for use and looking at it. We can go to the next slide. So that would be for how we are reaching people out in the how we are reaching out to people in the online world. And since the campaign has a bit of a bigger scope, we also decided to reach people in the physical world. This is the out of home campaign, which is basically physical advertisements in some of the places in Europe. Based on the target audience analysis, we chose the Warsaw, Berlin, Amsterdam highway route because this is the most frequented one that we've learned from before. And what you will be able to see on these routes will be basically some billboards and then some stickers and other materials appearing, for example, in the parking lots or gas stations. So this is kind of like a first time trial. We are very happy that we managed to do something like this. It should be happening in December. So it will be in the busy period of the year. And based on the outcomes that we'll then get out of those, we may consider doing this long term also with the other campaigns coming up in the future years. The contents that you will see in the out-of-home campaign are basically related to what has been already shared, and those are the taglines on the posters, and the visual representation will be basically the same as we have in all our materials. So we really hope that you will also encounter some of these activities and that you will be with us on the road to fair transport.
I can see, and I'm very glad to see that our number of participants is not going down, which means that we have your attention still on, and we can proceed to session number 3, which is a again a nitty-gritty topic when it comes to mobility package 1. During this training of today, we really go into details of the enforcement of certain rules, and here in this session we will focus on the classification of infringements and the European Register of Road Transport Undertakings. As we have heard during the past 2 sessions, there are some of comments and let's say problematics that you mentioned with another digital system of the exchange of information and cooperation, which is IMI. Here in this session, we will target another system, ERRO, that is of course in the competences of DG Move, but also on which I would like to focus in the coming years. In case you have, let's say, any problems or needs that you would like to mention, please do so during this training. Also, because these kinds of meetings that we organize together with DG Grow serve also both DG Move and ELA to understand what is your feedback about the enforcement of the rules, to understand what are your problematics. Whatever you mention in the chat, we are then afterwards analyzing, trying to build upon it our future actions. So it is extremely important that you provide us with this feedback, that even if it's not a question, but you would like to simply comment on your vision of the new rules, whether something is still unclear to you, please give us this feedback, provide us with this in the chat or by raising a hand, because it really serves us to project our activities better and to be a bit more targeted for your benefit. So without further ado, I would pass the floor to Mr. Emmanuel Cabot again. Thank you, Mr. Cabot, for being with us and to present the novelties in the classification of infringements. The floor is yours, please.
Okay, let's try. So good afternoon to all. So I'm going to make a brief presentation about the work that we've done on the classification of infringements. So in Article 6.2 of Regulation 1071, it is provided that the Commission should drop a list of categories, type, and degree of seriousness of serious infringement. This serious infringement, this list should be additional to the list set out in Annex 4. And these are the infringements which may lead to the loss of good repute. This morning we talked about the return of the vehicle. This concerns the rules of establishment. Now we are dealing with another requirement of Regulation 1071 to have an authorization, which is the good repute. And these infringements are the infringement that the member state should take into consideration as regards the assessment of the good repute. So the member state should take into account these infringements. This infringement that has happened in their territory, but also the infringement from other member states. And the member state have to use this information when setting the priorities for check. So next slide, please. So the mobility package 1 had as a consequence the fact that the list of serious infringements was updated. So first, Regulation 2020-1055, so in the mobility package, modified the Annex 4 of Regulation 1071. This concerns the most serious infringement, so the one really the highest category. This one is not subject to an implementing act. It is decided by the legislator in Annex 4 of Regulation 1071. So this list was updated by the mobility package, which added infringement concerning exceeding driving time or not having a tachograph. So this is already in the Annex 4. But also new infringements were established as part of the mobility package, and the scope of infringement, which may lead to the loss of good repute, was also extended with the law applicable to contractual obligation and cabotage, for instance. Next slide. So we had an implementing act containing this classification of infringement and indicating the degree of seriousness for each infringement. This was the Regulation 2016-403. And therefore, as a consequence of the mobility package, the Commission amended Regulation 2016-403 to take into consideration the new infringement, which concern access to the international road market, driving and resting time under Regulation 561/2006, the rules on tachograph, and of course the new rules on the Directive 2020-1057 on the posting of drivers. There is a number of infringements for the legal act also that is totally unchanged and left unchanged by the mobility package. This concerns, for instance, periodic roadworthiness test, technical roadside inspection, speed limitation device, initial qualification and periodic training of drivers, driving license requirement, transport of dangerous goods by road, protection of animals during transport. So all this is unchanged. The amending regulation didn't touch it. And the original annex of regulation 2016-403 are left unchanged. So the new slide, please. So the adoption procedure for this new implementing regulation. So this was an implementing regulation that that is adopted by the Commission, but of course in the process with the member state and with the stakeholders. So the draft was discussed with the enforcement working group in March of last year, with the Road Transport Committee also last year, and then it had to be approved by the Road Transport Committee, and it was approved. And then the act was the implementing regulation was adopted in May 2020. Next slide, please. So we haven't changed the annex, which is the annex that we already had in regulation 2016-403. So we have 4 categories of infringement: the most serious infringement, the very serious infringement, the serious infringement, and the minor infringement. The most serious infringement, as I was explaining, are in the annex, but they are just reproduced in the annex because they are the ones that are in Annex 4 of Regulation 1071. Exceeding driving time and not having a tachograph have been added, but here they are in the annex only as a mention, but it's not the implementing act which decide that they are most serious infringements. It was the legislator in the mobility package, and this cannot be subject of the implementing legislation. The scope of infringement was extended, so we have new infringement on the law applicable to contractual obligation and on cabotage, for instance, importantly. And so, for instance, concerning the importance that the legislator was giving to the rules of on cabotage, cabotage rules, for instance, are identified as very serious infringements in the annex to the regulation 2016-403. We have also new infringements on weekly rest, return home of the driver, on the regulation 561/2006, or all the infringement on posting on the directive 2020-1057 that are added to the annex. We have also a category of infringements which are the minor infringement. And so these minor infringements are also in the tables, but some of them, I will come back to that, are subject to another act, a delegated act amending Annex 3 of Directive 2006-22. Next slide, please. Okay, so the delegated act is to amend Annex 3 of Directive 2006-22. So this directive was already subject, this annex had been already revised through regulation 2016-403. But what happened in the mobility package is that now to revise this directive, we have a delegated act, which is a different category of act that the implementing act that we adopted. So we need another instrument, which will be a delegated directive, because we are amending the directive 2006-22, and then we are amending Annex 3 with the update on the weighting of gravity of infringement of regulation 561 and 165. And again, here is to take into account of the regulatory developments introduced by regulation 2020-1054. And then this delegated act will update all the infringement and complement the amendment of regulation 2016-403. So next slide. So for this delegated act, We have discussed already the annex at the Enforcement Working Group in June 2022, and we will again present it at the Road Transport Committee in November 2022, with no need for vote then, because there's no need for vote for delegated act. This is subject to an opposition procedure from the member state and from the parliament. And then now we are proceeding with the inter-service consultation, and the act, the annex will then be published on the Better Regulation portal for adoption then by oral or written procedure. So with this, I end this presentation, and I guess we will take some questions maybe.
And thank you to ELA for the invitation to discuss this topic. I'm very happy to be with you all this afternoon. I also understand that this is the last presentation of this workshop, so thank you to all who are still here listening and participating. That's very nice to see. And I think this presentation now is a logical continuation of the presentation that Emmanuel just gave. Because here I will be talking about the changes to the European Register of Road Undertakings, which is the system which allows member states to exchange information, notably on the infringements that are committed in other member states on top of additional data. So ERU, just in one sentence, is a system which links the national registers of all member states through messages which are sent via the Commission and forwarded to the other member states. I'm sure all of you, maybe most of you, are aware of this system. So next slide, please. In a nutshell, and maybe this probably acts as a reminder for a lot of you, but for those not, then the main functionalities today of ERU, there are three. So there are the three green boxes that are here on the left of the slide. So there's three functionalities: the infringement notification functionality. So this allows the notifying member state. This allows the member state where an infringement has been detected to notify the member state of establishment of the vehicle of an infringement. The second one is to check the good repute. So this is to search for a transport manager's certificate of professional competence and its status. So when a manager is notably setting up in different member states, and so the status, whether it is valid or invalid. And the last functionality is the check community license functionality, which should be available to the roadside inspectors, and so is used to check the validity of a community license, notably and in particular during roadside check. The last functionality, I will not spend time here because it's a bit separate, and so that's the roadside inspection functionality. Next slide, please. So why I'm presenting today is that because of the changes to Mobility Package 1, there's a need also to update this European Register of Road Undertakings, and so the changes that are linked to that are the changes in Article 16 of the Regulation 1071. And so the context has been to better detect letterbox companies, and with the introduction of a common risk rating system across the European Union, is to check this risk rating of undertakings at the roadside. And so this year there was an implementing regulation that was published, as I've just said, on the risk rating formula, on how to calculate the risk rating formula, which infringements need to be included and how they should be included in the risk rating score. And so what ERU will aim to do is to facilitate the exchange of information on roadside checks which are made in other member states than the member state of establishment, also for those infringements to be included in the risk rating score from by the member state of establishment. So there are two legal acts that we need that the Commission is planning to amend, and so there is a decision and an implementing regulation, and so I'm going to get to these now. So next slide, please. The first act is a decision. I will spare you the details, but what is important is, of course, that for information to be exchanged between member states, that the same information is being exchanged in the same format. And so for that, we have to update technically what is to be included in the national registers, because the European register is not its own database, but it's only a connection within the databases of the different member states. And so this is purely a technical update, and so it will reflect the changes that have been made in the first paragraph of Article 16 of 1071, of Regulation 1071. And so those include the risk rating, so both the score, which is a number 0, 100, 223, and the band. So as you probably know now, the score corresponds to a risk rating band, which we've classified in 3 colors: red, amber, and green. And so that then has as a result that those undertakings with a poor score should be checked more frequently by enforcement authorities. There's also additional data on the number of employees of the undertaking, as well as the vehicles which are managed by the undertaking and their registration numbers. So all of this should already be in the national registers, and we will simply harmonize the formats through this decision. Next slide, please. I now come to the main changes as such to ERU, and so here there will be 3 or 4 main changes. So the first one is a mere reflection of the additional data to be exchanged through ERU. So that is what I've just mentioned before. ERU will also, starting from next year, it will be possible to exchange information, to exchange the result when the result of a roadside check is a clean check. And that's important because that means that no infringement has been detected, and that should help the undertakings to lower their risk rating score. And so it's very important that member states conducting roadside checks also inform the member state of establishment when a clean check has been detected, as well as minor infringements, which was not the case up to now. It will also be possible to exchange information on all infringements which have been detected but not sanctioned, and that is notably linked to a court case for which the reference is right here, which was delivered earlier this year or last year, I can't remember now, and which prevents the extraterritoriality of sanctioning of infringements against notably the tachograph regulation. And so here, what ERU will allow is to notify of infringements that have been detected, but which were not sanctioned on the basis of the enforcement of this court case. Finally, the last information that will be able to be exchanged is notification of unfitness of a transport manager, and so this has also been added based on a change to Regulation 1071. And so it will now be possible, not mandatory, for member states to inform other member states that a transport manager has been declared unfit in its own member state, on its own territory, and that therefore, as a result of the EU regulation, that that person should no longer be able to work or to operate in all the other member states. The second main change is to make specific functionalities available to roadside enforcers. So, as I've mentioned before, in the existing today, there should, in theory, be access by roadside enforcement to the Czech community license functionality, and this will be updated based on the new rules and the new functionality that will be made available to roadside enforcement will be called Czech Transport Undertaking Data. So you see the little correspondence table on the right here of the slide. And so that will allow notably roadside enforcement to check the risk rating score, to check the same as today, the community license of the undertaking which is being controlled, as well as the other data that is being added. There's a slight, in terms of timeline, it's just important to remember that in practice, the member states will have 12 months after the Commission adopts this implementing regulation to give access to their competent authorities at the roadside for this functionality. So member states will have time. We have still not adopted this implementing regulation as of today. It should happen in early 2023. And so starting from that point, member states will then have 12 months to put only the access to roadside enforcers to give them such an access within 12 months. Next slide, please. Very quickly, the last point, which is more of a technical point, it's that also this is maybe more of a bug fixing, but also feedback which we have received from member states that sometimes the use of ERU returns results which are not the ones that are expected, and so we found that there's a need to harmonize the search criteria in the national registers because of different formats in community license numbers or special characters. And so what we will do in this amendment is that we will make it simpler and also harmonize the way that national registers are expected to search for requests coming from other member states in order to return better results to those requesting member states. Next slide, please. So as next steps, I'm happy to share with you that this draft implementing regulation is publicly available now as a draft act. The link I'm hoping can be shared on the chat of this webinar. If that's not the case, I will send it very soon. And so it will the public feedback period on the draft is open until the 7th of December. And after that, the Commission adoption will follow, provided that the member states agree to this amendment. And so in terms of practical implementation, just a repetition of what I've said before, that these changes will come into force as soon as we have adopted, but that there is one delayed application which is allowing member states 12 months to grant their roadside enforcement access to one of the functionalities this system. So that's it for me. I'm now very eager either to answer questions or to hear about the practices of member states in the use of EO. So thank you, and back to you, Ivona.
If not, then I would like to really thank everyone who participated today. It was our honor to have so many of you today, especially from some member states. We have seen a lot of authorities, different authorities, especially police, who are not that very often with us. So we are glad to be able to host you at these kinds of events. I still encourage you to give us feedback if you have not managed to do so via chat or by raising a hand. You will receive a link to a satisfaction survey where you could actually mention any topics that you have not managed to mention. So we please encourage you to, you can see it already on the screen, to provide us with your feedback on this session. I will also remind you that this session, like the previous one on passengers transport, is being recorded and in an edited version will be published at our ELA channel on YouTube in all the 23 linguistic versions. So you will be able to find it. We will still publicize it on our social media, so you will find the links. However, please follow us on YouTube, where all the videos will be published. What is next? What we have mentioned in the meantime, there will be a focus on the IMI for road transport in December. It will, of course, in a natural way, we will be targeting national authorities that are connected to IMI, because, of course, this is a topic for the IMI users. Thus, if you have been contacted by your national liaison officer, please get back to us with either feedback in the survey in the questionnaire that we have sent, or with your nomination to be the participant in Bratislava in December. We will also, as ELA, continue together with the European Commission to offer similar, let's say, training sessions or workshop in the next year, or even years to come. So please follow us, and we will try to be as precise in targeting your needs as possible. So you can either through the survey, as I said, or through other means, the emails that you received from us, please contact us, suggest topics that would be of your interest, and we will definitely be trying to accommodate that. And then at the end, I would like to give a big thank you to the interpreters, because it was a very technical meeting. So I understand their effort was really huge in order to translate and interpret everything what has been said. And with that, I will thank you for participating. And I will tell you, see you next time that we organize a similar activity. Thank you very much.